In The alien goddess slept for centuries, until a human took up her sword. The climactic moment arrives when Graham faces the seemingly invincible Lord Vorak in ritual combat. Outmatched physically, Graham presses the blade of truth against his own heart, unleashing its ultimate power, revealing the truth of both warriors' intentions. Vorak falls to his knees, overwhelmed by the sword's judgment of his selfish ambition, while Graham's pure motives shine golden. Golden light flickered across ancient runes as Graham Hayes adjusted his headlamp, the beam dancing across hieroglyphs that predated humanity itself. The cool, damp air of the underground temple carried whispers of a civilization lost to time, preserved in this vast network of chambers, buried beneath miles of rock and soil. Graham's breath condensed in front of him, creating ephemeral clouds that dissipated into the shadows of the cavernous hall. "Remarkable preservation," he murmured, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. His fingers, protected by thin archaeological gloves, traced the air inches from the wall inscriptions, never touching, always respecting protocol. 7 years of research, 3 expeditions, and countless sleepless nights had led to this moment, the discovery of pre-human ruins on an abandoned planet at the edge of charted space. The hall stretched before him, its ceiling vaulting upward into darkness that his lamp couldn't penetrate. Slender columns carved from stone that resembled obsidian, but sparkled with embedded constellations, supported the massive structure. At regular intervals, ancient mist dispensers still functioned, releasing a hiss of humidity that preserved the integrity of the temple's materials. Technology far beyond what should have existed in its era. Graham moved forward cautiously, each footstep echoing across the polished floor. His equipment, a combination of scanning devices, holographic projectors, and analytical tools, hung from his utility belt, occasionally clinking against his thigh. The exoplanet's unusual magnetic field made most advanced technology unreliable this deep underground, forcing him to rely on more traditional archaeological methods. "Base camp. Do you copy?" Graham spoke into his communicator, receiving only static in response. "As expected," he sighed, making a mental note to return to the surface within 4 hours if communication couldn't be established. He had left his team at the entrance of the temple, standard protocol for initial exploration of unstable structures. Dr. Voss, the expedition leader, had been explicit in her instructions. Observe only, document everything, touch nothing. Graham understood the caution. His career had been built on meticulous attention to detail and respect for archaeological ethics. Yet something about this place pulled at him, a sensation he'd never experienced at any other site. The path sloped gently downward, leading him deeper into the earth. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Graham adjusted his thermal layer as he continued. The walls began to change, transitioning from carved stone to a material that resembled polished metal infused with liquid starlight. The runes here were different, more complex, more urgent in their appearance. Graham paused to capture high-resolution scans, his equipment humming softly as it documented every inch of the passages. The translator program would need days to process this unknown language, but preliminary analysis suggested it contained mathematical principles that aligned with universal constants. These weren't merely decorative inscriptions. They were communicating something fundamental. "Whoever built this," Graham whispered to himself, "they understood the language of the cosmos." The passageway suddenly widened, opening into a circular chamber that took Graham's breath away. Unlike the previous halls, this room blazed with its own internal light, a soft, amber glow emanating from crystalline structures embedded in the walls. At the center stood a raised dais, and upon it, a sword. Not just any sword, a blade of impossible design. Its hilt was encrusted with gems that seemed to shift color as Graham approached, and the blade itself appeared almost translucent from certain angles. solid, and formidable from others. It hovered slightly above its pedestal, suspended by no visible means, rotating slowly in place. Impossible, Graham breathed, his archaeological training momentarily forgotten in the face of such wonder. His scanner beeped frantically, registering energy patterns it couldn't categorize. Graham circled the dais cautiously, documenting the sword from every angle. The chamber's walls were covered in elaborate friezes, depicting what appeared to be a war between beings of light and shadow. In the center of one mural, a figure held aloft a weapon identical to the sword on the dais. His communicator crackled suddenly, startling him. "Hayes!" Dr. Voss's voice came through, distorted but recognizable. "Status report." "You need to see this," Graham replied, excitement overriding protocol. "I've found some kind of ceremonial chamber with a suspended artifact. A sword. The technology is beyond anything we've cataloged from this period." "Absolutely do not approach it," Dr. Voss's voice hardened. "Energy readings from your sector are spiking. We're sending a containment team. I repeat, do not—" The communication cut out abruptly, leaving Graham in silence broken only by the soft hum emanating from the sword. He should wait. He knew that. Standard procedure demanded he secure the site and wait for the specialized team. But something about the sword called to him. Not a voice, not even a feeling, more like a recognition, as though it had been waiting specifically for him. The thought was absurd. Graham knew he was a scientist, not a mystic. Yet in all his years of excavation, he had learned to trust the inexplicable pull that sometimes led to the greatest discoveries. "This defies all archaeological protocol," he muttered, even as he stepped closer to the dais. The sword's rotation slowed as he approached, as though responding to his presence. The gems in its hilt began to pulse with light, creating patterns that matched his heartbeat. Graham's scanner went silent, its screen displaying only static. The sword had stopped rotating completely now, its hilt oriented toward him in what felt unmistakably like an invitation. "Dr. Voss is going to revoke my credentials for this," Graham said with a nervous laugh. He removed his glove, another violation of protocol, and slowly extended his hand toward the golden hilt. The moment his fingers closed around it, the chamber erupted in light. Energy coursed up Graham's arm, not painful but overwhelming, like being immersed in an electrical storm. The sword's blade blazed with golden fire, casting his shadow in gigantic proportions against the chamber walls. Graham tried to release the hilt, but found he couldn't, or wouldn't. The power flowing through him felt right somehow, as though awakening something that had always been dormant within him. The runes along the chamber walls illuminated in sequence, racing around the circular room until every inscription glowed with inner fire. The dais beneath the sword began to split apart, sections of the floor receding to reveal a hidden compartment. From within rose a crystalline sarcophagus, transparent enough for Graham to see the figure contained within. She appeared to be sleeping, her features perfect in repose. Humanoid, but with an ethereal quality that marked her as something other. Skin with a subtle luminescence, hair that moved slightly despite the absence of wind. She wore armor of an unfamiliar design, elegant yet formidable, inscribed with the same runes that covered the chamber walls. As Graham watched, transfixed, her eyes opened. They were unlike any he had seen, irises shifting between gold and silver, with pupils shaped like four-pointed stars. Those eyes fixed on him, then moved to the sword in his hand. The sarcophagus dissolved, evaporating into mist that swirled briefly before dissipating. The woman, or whatever she was, sat up slowly, movements fluid after what must have been centuries of stillness. When she spoke, Graham heard the words both in his ears and inside his mind. 700 years, she said, her voice musical, yet carrying an undertone of steel. 700 years I have slept, waiting for one who could awaken the blade of truth. Graham found his voice, though it sounded distant to his own ears. Who are you? She stood, her height matching his own, her presence making the spacious chamber feel suddenly small. I am Lurin, shield maiden of the Seventh Covenant, daughter of the Celestial Court. Her gaze sharpened. And you, human, have just initiated a sequence that will bring the armies of my people down upon this sanctuary. As if summoned by her words, a low, resonant alarm began to sound throughout the temple. The walls trembled, dust falling from the ceiling as ancient security systems activated. The sword in Graham's hand pulsed, responding to the alarm. We need to leave. Now! Lurin moved with astonishing speed, crossing to one of the friezes and pressing her palm against a specific constellation of runes. A hidden doorway materialized in the wall. They will come for the sword, and for me. Who will come? Graham demanded, finally finding his scientific skepticism again. What is happening here? Lurin turned, her expression a mixture of impatience and something like pity. My betrothed and his honor guard. I was hidden here to await a political marriage that would unite two factions of the Celestial Court. Your awakening of the blade has triggered the alert system. She gestured to the sword. That weapon belongs to my lineage, meant to be surrendered as part of my dowry. By awakening it, you have claimed it, and by extension, challenged my betrothal. The implications struck Graham like a physical blow. I've accidentally what? Proposed to you? Through some ancient custom. Worse, Lurin said grimly. You've declared yourself worthy to contest for me in trial by combat. Lord Vorak does not take such challenges lightly, especially from a human. The trembling of the temple intensified. Dust and small fragments of stone began to rain down from the ceiling. Lurin grabbed Graham's arm, pulling him toward the hidden passage. Wait, Graham protested. My team is up there. I need to warn them. Your team will be safer than you, Lurin said. The Celestial Guard comes for the blade and, for me, you, as the one who claimed the sword, will be eliminated without question. As if to emphasize her point, a blast of energy struck the chamber entrance, partially collapsing it. Through the dust and debris, Graham caught a glimpse of armored figures advancing, humanoid, but radiating power that made his skin prickle from a distance. Decision time, archaeologist, Lurin said, her hand still extended toward the passage. Stay and face execution, or run, and perhaps survive long enough to understand what you've awakened. Graham looked back at the advancing figures, then to the sword in his hand, still glowing with inner light. His scientific mind reeled at everything happening, but his instincts, the same ones that had led him to this chamber, pushed him forward. Lead the way, he said, following Lurin into the hidden passage, as another energy blast shook the chamber behind them. The hidden corridor plunged steeply downward, narrower than the main passages, and illuminated only by strips of bioluminescent material embedded in the floor. Graham's headlamp provided additional light, casting Lurin's shadow, long and distorted against the walls. 700 years, Graham said as they hurried along the passage. You've been in suspended animation for 7 centuries? A blink. By the standards of my people, Lurin replied without slowing. The Celestial Court measures time differently than humans. What you call years, we consider moments. And you were hidden here as part, what, an arranged marriage? Between godlike beings? Lurin glanced back at him, something like amusement crossing her features. We are not gods, archaeologist. Merely a civilization that achieved what yours might, given enough millennia of evolution. Then what are you? Graham pressed, struggling to keep pace with her fluid movements. The simplest explanation in your terms? We are energy-given consciousness and form. Your ancestors might have called us angels or deities. Your descendants might call us the inevitable next stage of cosmic evolution. The passage split into 3 branches. Lurin paused, considering each option before selecting the rightmost corridor. This will lead us to the ancient armory. We may find something there to help us. Help us do what exactly? Graham asked, the reality of their situation beginning to settle in. Escape? Fight? I'm an archaeologist, not a warrior. Yet, you hold the blade of truth, Lurin observed. It would not have awakened for you if you did not possess the necessary qualities. Which are? Purity of intent, courage without arrogance, wisdom tempered by compassion. She gave him an appraising look. The blade sees something in you, Graham Hayes. Perhaps we should trust its judgment. The use of his name startled him. How do you? Your thoughts are somewhat accessible to me while you hold the blade. Not all of them, but enough. She smiled slightly. You need not worry. Your privacy remains largely intact. The corridor widened suddenly, opening into a vast chamber, unlike anything Graham had seen in the temple so far. Unlike the ceremonial spaces above, this room was clearly utilitarian. Weapons racks lined the walls, and training circles were marked on the floor. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, untouched for centuries, yet somehow preserved in perfect condition. Lurin moved directly to a sealed container at the far end of the room. She placed her palm against its surface, and the container hummed to life, internal mechanisms whirring as it unlocked itself. The equalizer, she said, removing what appeared to be a modified crossbow, constructed of the same star metal as her armor. A weapon designed to temporarily neutralize the energy advantage of celestial beings. She offered it to Graham, who took it cautiously. I've never fired a weapon in my life, he admitted. It requires no skill, Lurin assured him. It reads intention and adjusts accordingly. Simply aim in the general direction of your target, and will it to fire. That's not scientific, Graham protested. Lurin raised an eyebrow. Is that sword in your hand scientific? Are the beings pursuing us scientific? Some technologies transcend what you would recognize as science. Archaeologist. Before Graham could respond, a thunderous boom echoed from the corridor behind them. The temple shook, and dust rained from the ceiling. They've found the passage, Lurin said, her expression hardening. They're using energy blasts to clear the way. How many are we talking about? Graham asked, gripping the equalizer more tightly. Standard pursuit protocol would be a commander and 6 honor guards, Lurin replied. We should assume Commander Zephyr leads them. He has been Lord Vorak's right hand for 3 millennia. Wonderful, Graham muttered. So we're facing 7 godlike beings with 1 sword and a crossbow. The blade and equalizer are specifically designed to counter celestial energy, Lurin reminded him. And we have one advantage they do not. Which is? They expect to retrieve a compliant bride and a deactivated sword, Lurin said, a fierce light entering her eyes. Instead, they face a shield maiden with no intention of surrendering her freedom, and a human who has awakened a power they thought safely contained. Another blast shook the chamber, closer this time. Dust and small pieces of debris fell from the ceiling. The ancient lighting flickered, plunging the armory into momentary darkness before stabilizing again. We need a plan, Graham said, scanning the room for additional weapons or exits. There. Lurin pointed to what appeared to be a ventilation shaft, high on the far wall. That connects to the temple's environmental systems. It can lead us to the surface eventually. And in the meantime, Graham asked, eyeing the corridor, where the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Lurin's expression turned grim. In the meantime, archaeologist, you learn whether your hands are meant for brushing dust from relics or wielding a blade in battle. Graham swallowed hard, but nodded. I didn't come this far to surrender to the first complication. Good, Lurin said, something like respect flickering in her otherworldly eyes. Because here they come. The corridor entrance exploded in a blast of energy and light. Through the dust and debris stepped 7 figures in armor, that seemed to be made of solidified moonlight. Their helmets concealed their features, but an aura of power emanated from them that made the air itself feel heavy with potential. The figure at their center stepped forward, taller than the others by half a head. When he spoke, his voice resonated with harmonic undertones that made Graham's teeth vibrate. "Shield Maiden Lurin, daughter of the Eastern Celestial House, betrothed of Lord Vorak." The commander's helmet dissolved, revealing features too perfect to be human: angular, luminous, cold as distant stars. "Your hibernation cycle has been prematurely terminated. We are here to escort you to your intended." Lurin stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Graham. "Commander Zephyr, 700 years, and still running errands for Vorak? One would think you'd have earned a more dignified assignment by now." Zephyr's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. "The human has interfered with matters beyond his comprehension. Surrender the blade of truth, and his death will be painless." "The blade has chosen him," Lurin replied. "By our own most ancient laws, that grants him the right of challenge." Murmurs passed through the honor guard. Zephyr's eyes narrowed. "A human cannot invoke the challenge rights. It is unprecedented." "Yet here we stand," Lurin said, her voice gaining strength. "The blade awakened to his touch. Would you violate the fundamental laws that govern our kind?" Zephyr's gaze shifted to Graham, assessing him with cold calculation. "Surrender the sword, human. It is not meant for your kind." Graham felt the weight of that inhuman stare, the pressure of power, far beyond his understanding. For a moment, doubt crept in. He was an archaeologist facing beings that had been worshipped as gods. What chance did he have? But the sword in his hand pulsed, warm and reassuring, and he felt a surge of confidence that came not from himself, but from the blade. Or perhaps, he realized, it was merely awakening what had always been within him. "The sword stays with me," Graham said, surprised at the steadiness in his voice. "And Lurin goes where she chooses, not where she's ordered." Zephyr's expression darkened. "Then you have chosen death." He raised a hand, energy gathering around his fingers like liquid lightning. "Now!" Lurin shouted. Graham raised the equalizer and focused his intent as Lurin had instructed. The weapon hummed, aligned itself, and fired, all seemingly of its own accord. A pulse of anti-energy struck Zephyr, square in the chest, disrupting the power he had been gathering. The commander staggered back, momentary confusion crossing his perfect features. Lurin moved with blinding speed, crossing the space between them in a blur. Her hand shot out, striking a precise point on Zephyr's armor. The commander froze, his body locked in place by some hidden mechanism in his own protection. "The override sequence," Zephyr hissed. "How did you—" "I've had 700 years to contemplate every weakness in our defenses," Lurin replied coldly, "including the command overrides built into honor guard armor." The remaining 6 guards advanced, weapons materializing in their hands, spears of pure energy that crackled with destructive potential. Graham raised the equalizer again, firing instinctively. 2 guards went down, their energy temporarily neutralized, but the others spread out, making themselves harder targets. "The ventilation shaft," Lurin called, engaging one of the guards in close combat. Her movements were a blur, striking with precision at weak points in the guard's armor. Graham fired again, dropping another guard, then sprinted toward the shaft. He leapt, catching the edge of the opening, and pulled himself up with strength, born of desperation. Once inside, he turned back, extending his hand toward Lurin. She dispatched her opponent with a final strike, then raced toward the shaft, leaping with inhuman grace to catch Graham's outstretched hand. He pulled her up beside him just as energy spears struck the wall where she had stood moments before. "Go!" she commanded, pushing him deeper into the shaft. "They'll be right behind us." They crawled rapidly through the narrow space, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. The ventilation system branched in multiple directions, creating a labyrinth that would have been impossible to navigate without Lurin's knowledge. "Left here," she directed, guiding them through the maze. "Then 2 rights and straight for 50 meters. Graham followed her instructions, the sword awkwardly strapped to his back, the equalizer clutched in one hand. The shaft began to slope upward, and fresh air, or what passed for it on this ancient planet, began to filter through. "Where are we heading?" Graham asked between breaths. "The ancestral hangar," Lurin replied. "If we're fortunate. The vessel I arrived in 7 centuries ago may still be operational." "A spaceship after 700 years? Our technology doesn't degrade like yours," Lurin said. "It enters dormancy, waiting to be reactivated." They emerged from the ventilation system into a cavernous space that dwarfed even the temple chambers. Rows of sleek vessels lined the hangar floor, covered in the same fine dust that seemed to pervade everything in the ancient complex. Despite their age, the ships appeared untouched by time, their metallic surfaces still gleaming beneath the dust. Lurin headed directly toward a smaller craft near the back wall. Unlike the others, which bore markings of military precision, this one was sleeker, clearly designed for speed and stealth rather than combat. "My personal transport," she explained, placing her palm against its hull. Lines of light spread from her touch, tracing the contours of the ship as systems awakened. "A gift from my mother before I was sent into hibernation." A doorway materialized in the ship's side, opening silently to reveal an interior that seemed impossibly spacious compared to the vessel's external dimensions. "Dimensional engineering," Lurin said, noting Graham's expression. "The interior exists partially in another spatial fold." "Of course it does," Graham muttered, too overwhelmed by everything to be properly astonished anymore. "Why not?" They stepped inside, the door sealing behind them. The interior illuminated with a soft amber glow, control panels awakening as Lurin approached. She placed her hands on what appeared to be a navigation console, and the ship hummed to life around them. "Can this thing outrun them?" Graham asked, storing the equalizer in a compartment that seemed designed for it. "In open space." "Yes," Lurin replied, her fingers dancing across the controls. "But first we need to reach open space, and they'll have the main hangar exits monitored." "So we're trapped?" Lurin smiled, a fierce expression that transformed her face. "Not trapped, challenged. There's a difference." She accessed another panel, bringing up a holographic display of the hangar and surrounding structures. "The temple complex has a self-destruct mechanism, a final failsafe in case our secrets were discovered by hostile forces. I can trigger it remotely." "Destroying priceless archaeological treasures," Graham said, his professional instincts battling with their survival needs. "Saving your life," Lurin corrected, "and preserving my freedom. The choice seems clear." Before Graham could respond, the ship's sensors blared a warning. On the external monitors, they could see the honor guards entering the hangar, with Zephyr, now freed from his temporary paralysis, leading them. "Decision time, archaeologist," Lurin said. "History or survival?" Graham closed his eyes briefly, thinking of everything the temple could teach humanity about its cosmic past. Then he thought of Lurin being forced into an eternity of servitude, and of his own, rather more immediate death. "Do it," he said. "Trigger the self-destruct." Lurin nodded, her expression solemn as she entered a complex sequence into the control panel. The temple's warning systems activated immediately, klaxons blaring throughout the complex. Self-destruct sequence initiated," announced an automated voice in a language Graham somehow understood despite never having heard it before. "Complete structural collapse in 3 minutes." On the monitors, they watched as the honor guard froze, then began rushing back toward the temple entrance. Priorities shifted from capture to escape. "Now for our exit," Lurin said, activating the ship's engines. Instead of moving toward the main hangar doors, however, She piloted the craft toward the seemingly solid back wall. "That's not an exit," Graham pointed out, bracing himself for impact. "It is if you know the override codes," Lurin replied, entering another sequence. The wall before them shimmered and dissolved, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped upward toward the surface. The ship surged forward, accelerating through the passage as the first explosions began to rock the temple complex behind them. Graham gripped his seat as the craft navigated the tight confines, occasionally scraping against the tunnel walls in a shower of sparks. "The tunnel wasn't designed for vessels this size," Lurin explained, hands steady on the controls, despite the violent shaking. "It was an emergency escape route for personnel, not ships." "Wonderful time to mention that," Graham said through gritted teeth, as another impact sent vibrations through the hull. The tunnel suddenly widened, and the ship burst forth onto the planet's surface, emerging from what appeared to be an innocent rock formation, several kilometers from the main temple entrance. Behind them, the ground began to collapse inward as the self-destruct sequence progressed, creating a massive sinkhole where the temple had stood. "Your team?" Lurin asked, glancing at Graham as she piloted the ship skyward. "Should be at the base camp, well away from the temple," Graham replied, hoping it was true. He thought of Dr. Voss and the others, imagining their confusion at the sudden destruction. "They'll assume I died in the collapse." "A necessary sacrifice," Lurin said. "If the Celestial Court believes you perished, they may not pursue us with the same urgency." The ship broke through the atmosphere, accelerating into the darkness of space. Through the viewports, Graham watched as the planet receded, becoming just another point of light among countless stars. "Where are we going?" he asked finally. "Haven," Lurin replied. "A planet concealed within the veiled nebula, beyond the reach of celestial scanners. A sanctuary for those who seek freedom from the court's influence." Graham's mind reeled at the implications. In the space of a few hours, he had gone from respected archaeologist to fugitive, fleeing across space with a being that could only be described as divine, bearing a sword of impossible power and pursued by the equivalent of angry gods. "This is not how I expected my expedition to end," he said, a hint of hysterical laughter bubbling up inside him. Lurin looked at him, her otherworldly eyes softening slightly. "How did you expect it to end? Published papers? Academic recognition? Perhaps a department chairmanship at the university?" He shook his head. "Not cosmic politics and sword fights." "The universe rarely conforms to our expectations," Lurin observed. "That is what makes it worth exploring." The ship's engines hummed as they accelerated to superluminal speeds, stars streaking past the viewports in ribbons of light. Graham felt the sword at his side pulse in response, as though excited by their journey. "Why did it choose me?" he asked suddenly. "The blade. Out of all possible beings. Why a human archaeologist?" Lurin was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the starscape ahead. "The blade of truth responds only to certain qualities, purity of intent chief among them. Not moral purity, but clarity of purpose." She turned to look at him. "You sought knowledge for its own sake, not power or personal gain. Such motivations are rare, even among my kind. And now? Now you wield a weapon that could challenge the highest powers of the Celestial Court," Lurin said. "The question becomes, what will you do with it?" Graham looked down at the sword, its glow subdued but ever-present. "I don't want power," he said honestly. "I never have." "Which is precisely why the blade chose you," Lurin replied. "Those who desire power most are those who should wield it least." The ship's sensors chimed, indicating they were approaching their destination. Through the forward viewport, Graham could see a vast nebula spreading across the starfield, its swirling colors concealing whatever lay within. "The Veiled Nebula," Lurin announced, "and somewhere within it, Haven awaits." She adjusted their course, guiding the ship into the nebula's outer reaches, Clouds of cosmic dust and gas enveloped them, obscuring the stars and bathing the ship in ethereal light. The nebula's unique properties interfere with celestial scanning technology, Lurin explained. And Haven itself is shielded by ancient technology that predates even the court. We will be safe there, at least for a time. As they penetrated deeper into the nebula, the clouds began to thin, revealing glimpses of a blue-green world orbiting a distant sun. Unlike the barren planet they had fled, this one teemed with life, its surface a mosaic of oceans and forested continents. Haven, Lurin said, a note of reverence in her voice. Founded by dissidents from the Celestial Court millennia ago, it has remained hidden from those who would enforce conformity and tradition above all else. The ship descended through Haven's atmosphere, skimming over vast forests and mountain ranges before approaching what appeared to be a city nestled within a valley. Unlike the sterile architecture of the temple, this settlement blended harmoniously with its natural surroundings, structures rising from the landscape as though they had grown there rather than being built. The sanctuary, Lurin explained, as she piloted the ship toward a landing platform extending from one of the larger structures. Center of governance for Haven and home to its oldest inhabitants. They touched down gently, the ship's systems powering down as Lurin completed the landing sequence. For a moment, they sat in silence, the reality of everything that had transpired washing over them. "What happens now?" Graham asked finally. "Now," Lurin said, rising from her seat. "We meet those who may help us understand what the Blade's awakening truly means, and prepare for the conflict that will inevitably follow." The ship's door opened, revealing a welcoming committee already gathered on the landing platform. Beings similar to Lurin in their ethereal beauty, yet dressed not in armor, but in flowing garments that seemed woven from living light. "Ready?" Lurin asked, extending her hand to Graham. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the sword at his side and the equalizer now strapped to his thigh. "As I'll ever be," he replied, taking her hand and stepping with her into their uncertain future. The welcoming party approached with measured steps, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and caution. At their center walked an elder figure, distinguished by the silver circlet upon his brow and the gravitas of his bearing. "Shield Maiden Lurin," he greeted, his voice carrying the same harmonic qualities as Zephyr's, but tempered with warmth rather than cold authority. "Your return was foretold, though not its timing or circumstances." His gaze shifted to Graham, lingering on the sword at his side. "And you bring with you a human wielding the blade of truth. Most unexpected." Lurin inclined her head respectfully. "Elder Tahrish, the blade has chosen, and in doing so, has set in motion events that may reshape the balance of power within the court." "So I see," Tahrish replied, his ageless eyes studying Graham with intense interest. "Come, the council awaits, and there is much to discuss." They followed the elder through the city, Graham marveling at the architecture that seemed to defy conventional physics. Buildings spiraled upward without visible supports. Bridges spanned impossible distances. And everywhere, life flourished. Plants unlike any Graham had seen, and beings of various forms, some resembling Lurin's kind, others more diverse in appearance. "Haven welcomes all who seek freedom from oppression," Lurin explained quietly as they walked. "Not only dissidents from the Celestial Court, but refugees from 100 worlds across the cosmos." They arrived at a circular structure that appeared to be grown rather than built. Its walls formed from living crystal that hummed with subtle energy. Inside, a council chamber awaited them, a ring of seated figures surrounding a central dais, illuminated by shafts of natural light. Elder Tahrish led them to the center, where all could see and be seen. "Honored Council," he announced, "I present Shield Maiden Lurin of the Eastern House, and—" he paused, looking to Graham. "Graham Hayes," Graham supplied, "archaeologist from Earth." Murmurs rippled through the council at the mention of Earth. Tahrish raised a hand for silence before continuing. Graham Hayes of Earth, who now bears the blade of truth. They come seeking sanctuary and counsel. A counselor with features that reminded Graham of carved jade leaned forward. The blade has not been seen active for 10,000 years. Its awakening is a significant omen. Or a significant problem, countered another, their form shifting between solid and vapor as they spoke. Lord Vorak will not simply surrender his claim to either the Shield Maiden or the blade. Lord Vorak's claim was political, not personal, Lurin stated firmly. A arrangement between houses, not a bond of choice. Yet binding by court law, the vaporous counselor noted. Court law also recognizes the blade's choice as superseding arranged bonds. Lurin countered. It is the oldest precedent in our history. Elder Tahrish nodded slowly. The Shield Maiden speaks truth. If the blade has truly chosen this human, he looked to Graham, then, by the most ancient laws, the betrothal is nullified. Vorak will not accept such a ruling, warned a counselor, who appeared composed entirely of interlocking geometric patterns of light. He will claim human interference invalidates the precedent. Then he challenges not just us, but the fundamental laws upon which the court was founded. Tahrish replied, A dangerous position, even for one of his influence. Graham, listening to the debate, finally spoke up. Forgive my ignorance, but what exactly does the blade's choice mean, beyond invalidating Lurin's betrothal? All eyes turned to him, many widening in surprise at his directness. Elder Tahrish studied him for a long moment before answering. The blade of truth is more than a weapon. Graham Hayes. It is a key to forgotten powers, abilities the court has deliberately obscured from its own history. Those who wield it can access energies that even the highest lords of the court cannot command. Which is precisely why they will come for it, added the jade-featured counselor. And for both of you. Then we must prepare, Lurin said, her posture straightening with resolve. Haven has stood against court interference before. We ask for your protection while we determine our next course of action. Elder Tahrish exchanged glances with the other counselors, silent communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded. Haven grants you sanctuary. Shield Maiden Lurin and Graham Hayes of Earth. You will be provided quarters, resources, and training. His expression grew grave. But understand this. While we will defend you, should Vorak's forces discover this place, we cannot engage in open conflict with the court. Our survival depends on secrecy and neutrality. We understand, Lurin replied, and we are grateful. The meeting concluded, and they were escorted to living quarters within one of the crystal spires overlooking the valley. Unlike the austere chambers of the temple, these rooms were warm and inviting, furnished with objects that seemed to hover at the boundary between technology and art. Left alone, Graham moved to the balcony, gazing out at the alien landscape of Haven. The sword at his side hummed softly, resonating with the energy that suffused this place. It likes it here, Lurin observed, joining him at the railing. The blade remembers Haven from the time before the court's rise to dominance. You speak as though it's alive, Graham said. In a sense, it is, Lurin replied. Not conscious as you or I, but aware in its own way. It was forged at the dawn of our civilization, imbued with principles that would later be forgotten or suppressed. Graham rested his hand on the hilt, feeling the now familiar warmth spread up his arm. I'm still not sure why it chose me. I'm not a warrior or a leader, just someone who asks questions about the past. Perhaps that is precisely why, Lurin suggested. You seek truth without agenda. You question not to control but to understand. She turned to face him fully. Do you know what my title means, Shield Maiden? Graham shook his head. It is not merely a military designation. In the ancient language of my people, it translates closer to Guardian of Possibility. We were tasked with protecting not just physical safety, but potential futures, paths that might otherwise be closed by those who fear change. And your betrothal to Vorak would have ended that role, Graham realized. Yes, the Eastern and Western houses uniting would have consolidated power, eliminating the traditional checks that prevent any faction from dominating court policy. Lurin's expression hardened. I was to be the price of political stability, my purpose sacrificed for tradition. Graham considered this, understanding dawning. So the blade chose someone who values knowledge and possibility over power and tradition. Someone who would free you rather than possess you. Precisely, Lurin said, something like admiration warming her otherworldly eyes. You understand more quickly than I expected. Archaeologist. I've spent my career piecing together motivations from fragments of evidence, Graham replied with a small smile. Though I usually have more time to analyze the data. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the alien sun begin to set, casting the valley in hues of amber and violet. In the city below, lights began to illuminate, not the harsh artificial glare of human settlements, but a soft, organic radiance that complemented rather than challenged the approaching night. What happens now? Graham asked finally. Training, you said. Yes, Lurin confirmed. You must learn to fully utilize the blade's potential, and I must reacquaint myself with combat techniques after 7 centuries of hibernation. When Vorak comes, and he will come, we must be ready. And if we're not? Lurin's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Then, the blade will pass to him. I will be bound in a political marriage for eternity, and you. She hesitated. You will not survive. Cheerful prospects, Graham said dryly. To his surprise, Lurin laughed, a sound like crystal wind chimes stirred by a summer breeze. You face potential oblivion with remarkable composure. Archaeologist. Professional hazard, Graham replied with a shrug. When you spend your career excavating the remains of fallen civilizations, you develop a certain perspective on mortality. Lurin turned to him, her expression softening. Then perhaps that perspective will serve you well in the days to come. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, your true education begins. The days that followed established a rhythm unlike anything in Graham's previous experience. Each morning began with physical training, not the brutal military drills he had expected, but flowing movements that resembled dance as much as combat, designed to attune his human physiology to the sword's energy. The blade responds to intention and harmony, not brute strength, Lurin explained, as she guided him through forms that stretched his body's capabilities. Feel its rhythm matching your heartbeat, your breath becoming synchronized with its pulse. Afternoons were devoted to education, immersion in the history, culture, and science of the Celestial Court and its dissident movements. Elder Tarish often led these sessions personally, his millennia of experience providing context that no text could convey. The court was not always as it is now, the elder explained during one such lesson. In its founding era, it served as steward rather than ruler of the cosmos, guiding younger civilizations rather than dominating them. The blade you carry is an artifact from that earlier philosophy, a tool of enlightenment rather than conquest. Evenings brought practical application. Graham, learning to channel the sword's energy in controlled bursts, cutting through targets of increasingly resilient materials. The equalizer proved easier to master, its technology adapting to his intentions with minimal training required. Throughout it all, Lurin remained at his side, teacher, partner, and increasingly, friend. Her initial formality gradually gave way to a more relaxed camaraderie as they shared meals, frustrations, and occasional moments of triumph when Graham mastered a particularly difficult technique. You learn quickly for a human, she remarked one evening as they rested after a grueling training session. Necessity is a powerful motivator, Graham replied, massaging a muscle that protested the day's exertions. as is the desire not to embarrass myself in front of a 700-year-old goddess. Not a goddess, Lurin corrected automatically, though her lips curved in a smile. Though I admit, I find your stubborn determination admirable. Such moments of connection became more frequent as days stretched into weeks. Graham found himself studying Lurin when she wasn't looking. The grace of her movements, the subtle shifts in her expressions, the way her eyes reflected starlight with supernatural clarity. He told himself it was scientific curiosity, the archaeologist in him cataloging details of an extraordinary being. But in quiet moments, he acknowledged the truth was simpler and more complicated all at once. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have been absurd. A human archaeologist developing feelings for a being whose lifespan was measured in millennia, whose nature existed at the boundary between energy and matter. Yet in their shared purpose, their mutual respect, and their growing trust, something profound had taken root. Whether Lurin felt similarly, Graham couldn't be certain. Her people expressed emotion differently, and cultural barriers complicated his interpretation of her actions. But occasionally, he would catch her watching him with an expression that mirrored his own quiet wonder, quickly masked when she noticed his attention. Their progress and training accelerated as their connection deepened. The sword responded more powerfully to Graham's commands, and their combat exercises evolved from separate drills to coordinated maneuvers, each anticipating the other's movements with increasing precision. The blade recognizes your growth, Elder Tarish observed during one evaluation. It shines brighter in your hands now, a sign of deepening attunement. Will it be enough? Graham asked, the question that had haunted him since their arrival on Haven. When Vorak comes? Tarish's ancient eyes held no false comfort. That remains to be seen. Vorak has stood undefeated in court combat for 9,000 years. He did not achieve such longevity through lack of skill. The Elder's caution proved prescient, sooner than any of them anticipated. 6 weeks after their arrival on Haven, as Graham and Lurin completed an evening training session, alarms sounded throughout the sanctuary. Proximity alert, announced a voice through the city's communication system. Celestial vessel approaching the Veiled Nebula. Configuration matches court diplomatic cruiser. Graham and Lurin exchanged alarmed glances before rushing to the council chamber, where Elder Tarish and the other leaders had already gathered around a holographic display showing the approaching ship. How did they find us? Demanded the vaporous counselor. They haven't, yet, Tarish replied, studying the vessel's trajectory. They're probing the nebula's outer boundaries, not heading directly for Haven, but their presence here cannot be coincidence. Vorak, Lurin said with certainty. He would not entrust this hunt to subordinates. As if summoned by her words, the holographic display flickered, and a new image appeared, a being of such perfect, terrible beauty that Graham found it difficult to look directly at him. Lord Vorak's features combined the finest aspects of human and divine, his armor more ornate than any Graham had seen, his presence commanding even through the projection. People of Haven, Vorak's voice resonated with harmonic overtones that made the crystal walls of the chamber vibrate in response. I come in peace, seeking only what is rightfully mine. Surrender the shield maiden Lurin and the human who has unlawfully claimed the blade of truth, and the celestial court will continue to respect your neutrality. Elder Tarish stepped forward, his own presence suddenly magnified as he responded to the transmission. Lord Vorak, Haven recognizes no claim that violates the free will of those who seek sanctuary here. The Shield Maiden and her companion are under our protection. Vorak's perfect features hardened slightly, the only indication of his displeasure. The human has interfered in matters beyond his comprehension. Elder, the blade's response to him is an anomaly, not a legitimate choosing. Yet it shines in his hand, Tarish countered, and dims when apart from him. These are the traditional signs. Lord Vorak, as you well know, Traditions can be manipulated, Vorak replied coldly. I offer one final opportunity for diplomatic resolution. Deliver them to the coordinates I provide within 12 hours, or I shall retrieve them myself, regardless of Haven's vaunted neutrality. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in tense silence. He cannot penetrate Haven's defenses, the jade-featured counselor said, though uncertainty tinged their voice. The Founder's shields have stood for millennia. Millennia during which the court has developed new weapons, Tarish replied grimly. We cannot assume invulnerability. He turned to Graham and Lurin. The choice is yours. We will honor our promise of sanctuary, but understand the risk Vorak's threat poses to all who dwell here. Graham felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Thousands of innocents lived in Haven, refugees who had found peace away from court politics. To endanger them for his and Lurin's sake seemed unconscionable. Before he could speak, Lurin placed a hand on his arm. We will not hide behind others, she declared firmly. This confrontation was inevitable from the moment the blade awakened. Better to face it on our terms than to flee eternally. Graham nodded slowly, finding his resolve in her certainty. We'll meet Vorak, he agreed. But not as supplicants or prisoners, as equals invoking the right of challenge. Elder Tahrish studied them both, ancient wisdom assessing their readiness. The formal challenge cannot be refused once properly invoked, he acknowledged. It would give you the protection of the court's most sacred laws during the confrontation. A shadow crossed his features. But if you fail, the consequences are absolute. We understand, Lurin said. Prepare a neutral meeting ground at the edge of Haven's territory. We will face Lord Vorak there, with the council as witnesses to ensure the ancient protocols are observed. Preparations moved with swift efficiency. A plateau overlooking the valley was selected as the meeting ground. Ancient stones arranged in a circular pattern to define the boundaries of formal challenge. Graham and Lurin spent the remaining hours in final preparations, checking equipment, reviewing strategies, and in Graham's case, attempting to quiet the very reasonable terror that threatened to overwhelm his determination. I've been training for 6 weeks, he confided to Lurin as they waited in a meditation chamber before departing for the plateau. Vorak has been perfecting his combat skills for 9,000 years. The odds aren't exactly in my favor. The blade chose you, Lurin reminded him, her faith unwavering. It sees qualities in you that statistical odds cannot measure. Graham managed a smile. Let's hope it's a better judge of character than I am of risk assessment. The journey to the plateau was made in solemn procession, the council members accompanying them as official witnesses. As they ascended the path, Graham could see Vorak's ship hovering in the distance, its design more organic than mechanical, pulsing with the same energy that powered the sword at his side. At the plateau's center, Lord Vorak awaited them, flanked by Commander Zephyr and 6 honor guards. Seeing him in person, rather than through holographic projection, Graham understood why ancient humans had worshipped such beings as gods. Vorak radiated power and perfection, his presence making the air itself feel heavier, reality bending subtly around him as though struggling to contain his essence. Shield Maiden, Vorak greeted Lurin, deliberately ignoring Graham. Your hibernation has ended prematurely, but your duty remains. Return to me now, and I shall be merciful to the human who interfered in our arrangement. Lurin stepped forward, her own presence expanding to match Vorak's, the warrior goddess within her fully awakened. I invoke the right of challenge, Lord Vorak, as is my prerogative under the first law of the Celestial Covenant. Murmurs arose from the honor guard, and even Zephyr's impassive features registered surprise. Vorak's perfect countenance darkened, storm clouds gathering in his luminous eyes. You would risk everything on combat? He asked, disbelief evident in his harmonic voice. For what? Freedom? You were born to duty, Shield Maiden, Your lineage exists to serve the greater balance. I was born to protect possibility, Lurin countered. And the greatest possibility is that of choice. I choose my own path now, not the one decreed for me in political arrangements. Vorak's gaze shifted to Graham, truly acknowledging him for the first time. And you, human, do you understand what you have stumbled into? The forces you now oppose? The sword you carry could shatter planets in the right hands. Perhaps that's why it chose hands that have no interest in shattering anything, Graham replied, surprising himself with his steadiness. I may not understand everything about your world, Lord Vorak, but I understand the difference between freedom and control. Admirable sentiments, Vorak said dismissively. They will make a poetic epitaph. He turned back to Lurin. I accept your challenge, as is my obligation under the Covenant. Name your champion. Lurin placed her hand on Graham's shoulder. He stands beside me, Graham Hayes of Earth, chosen of the Blade of Truth. Vorak laughed, the sound beautiful yet chilling. A human? Against me? The blade may have responded to him through some anomaly, but he cannot possibly wield it to its full potential. Then you have nothing to fear, Lurin replied calmly. Vorak's amusement faded, replaced by cold determination. So be it. The terms? Elder Tahrish stepped forward as neutral arbiter. Traditional rules of challenge apply. Combat continues until yield, incapacitation, or, he hesitated briefly, death. No interference from observers is permitted once the challenge circle is activated. Agreed, Vorak said, removing his ceremonial cape with fluid grace. Let us not prolong this farce unnecessarily. Graham unsheathed the sword, its golden light blazing brighter than ever before. The equalizer hung at his side, ready as secondary defense. Lurin gripped his arm briefly, before stepping back to join the observers outside the circle. Remember your training, she said quietly. And remember why the blade chose you. Tahrish raised his hands, and the ancient stones surrounding the plateau began to glow, energy rising between them to form a dome that enclosed Graham and Vorak in their own pocket of reality. The challenge is set, Tahrish's voice echoed within the dome. May truth prevail. For a moment, perfect stillness reigned as Graham and Vorak assessed one another across the plateau. Then, with speed that defied human perception, Vorak attacked. He moved like liquid light, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat, a sword of pure energy materializing in his hand as he struck. Graham raised the blade of truth instinctively, the two weapons meeting in a cascade of power that sent shockwaves rippling through the dome. The impact nearly drove Graham to his knees, Vorak's strength overwhelming despite the sword's enhancement of Graham's human abilities. Only the intensive training with Lurin saved him, his body responding automatically to shift the force of the blow aside rather than meeting it directly. Impressive reflexes, Vorak acknowledged as they separated. But reflexes alone will not save you. He attacked again, this time with a complex series of strikes that came from multiple angles simultaneously, his form seeming to blur as he moved. Graham defended desperately, the sword guiding his hands as much as his own skill, golden light blazing with each parry. You cannot win, Vorak said, his voice undisturbed by the exertion of combat. The longer this continues, the more your human limitations will show. Yield now, and I will grant you an honorable death. Graham didn't waste breath on a reply, focusing instead on the patterns Lurin had taught him, movements that channeled the sword's energy most efficiently. With each exchange, he felt himself attuned more deeply to the blade, its power flowing through him, not as separate force, but as extension of his own will. Vorak pressed his advantage, driving Graham steadily backward across the plateau. A particularly vicious strike slipped past Graham's guard, opening a searing wound across his ribs. Pain lanced through him, momentarily disrupting his concentration. Vorak seized the opportunity. launching a barrage of energy bolts from his free hand. Graham raised the sword too late, taking the brunt of the attack. The impact sent him sprawling, the blade nearly slipping from his grasp. "Pathetic," Vorak said, advancing on his fallen opponent. "This is who the Shield Maiden would choose over me? A fragile human who can barely stand after the opening exchanges?" Outside the dome, Graham could see Lurin watching, her expression tense but still believing. In that moment, something crystallized within him, not just determination to survive, but understanding of why the blade had chosen him. It wasn't about winning. It was about fighting for the right reasons. As Vorak raised his energy sword for what he clearly intended as a killing blow, Graham reached for the equalizer, aimed, and fired in one fluid motion. The anti-energy pulse struck Vorak square in the chest, momentarily disrupting the power that made him near invincible. The Celestial Lord staggered, genuine surprise crossing his perfect features as his energy levels fluctuated. Graham seized the moment, rolling to his feet and lunging forward with the blade of truth. The golden sword connected, drawing a line of silver fire across Vorak's armor. "Impossible!" Vorak hissed, true anger breaking through his composed facade. "That weapon was destroyed millennia ago." "Apparently not," Graham replied, finding strength in Vorak's dismay. "Lurin was more resourceful than you gave her credit for." Fury transformed Vorak's beauty into something terrible. He attacked with renewed vigor, abandoning elegant technique for raw power. Energy cascaded from his form, the very air within the dome becoming charged with destructive potential. Graham met the onslaught with newfound clarity. The sword sang in his hands, responding to his understanding of what they fought for. Not personal victory, but the principle of choice, the right to determine one's own path. "Your skill improves," Vorak acknowledged as they locked weapons, faces inches apart across the blinding interface of their clashing energies. "But you fight against the natural order. The Shield Maiden's duty is to her people, not her desires." "Her duty is to protect possibility," Graham countered, repeating Lurin's words, "including the possibility of freedom." They separated, circling each other with new wariness. Graham's wound burned, his human stamina taxed to its limits, but the sword's energy sustained him, flowing through his body in golden currents that mended damaged tissue and renewed failing strength. Vorak studied him with calculating eyes. "The blade truly has accepted you," he conceded. "A fascinating anomaly. Perhaps I shall preserve your consciousness after victory, to study this phenomenon further." "Or perhaps you'll lose," Graham suggested, readying himself for another exchange. Vorak's attack came with redoubled ferocity, his energy sword splitting into twin blades that attacked from opposite directions. Graham parried one, but couldn't block the other, taking a glancing hit to his shoulder that sent him spinning. Before he could recover, Vorak was upon him, one energy blade pressed against his throat, the other poised to strike through his heart. The Celestial Lord's face hovered above him, triumph gleaming in his otherworldly eyes. "Yield," Vorak commanded. "Acknowledge defeat, and your death will be swift." Graham felt the sword pulse in his hand, still radiating golden light despite his precarious position. Something in that steady glow reminded him of Lurin's faith, of Elder Tarisha's wisdom about the blade's origins. "The sword doesn't serve power," Graham said, his voice steady despite the energy blade singing the skin of his throat. "It serves truth." With his remaining strength, Graham didn't attack Vorak. Instead, he pressed the blade of truth flat against his own chest, directly over his heart. Golden light exploded outward, enveloping both of them in a sphere of radiance that transcended physical illumination. In that moment, truth became tangible. The dome filled with visions, Vorak's millennia of calculated political maneuvers, his cold ambition to consolidate court power under his influence, his view of Lurin not as partner, but as asset to be controlled. Alongside these played Graham's journey, his pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, his willingness to sacrifice personal safety for Lurin's freedom, his growing love for her that asked nothing in return. The sword judged them both. Ancient principles evaluating not combat prowess, but the heart's intent. Vorak screamed, a sound of pure anguish as the blade's judgment seared through his carefully constructed justifications. His energy swords flickered and died, power fluctuating wildly as the truth of his motivations stood revealed. Graham rose, the sword blazing in his hand with intensity that outshone even Vorak's celestial radiance. The blade had made its final choice, and in doing so, had fully awakened its long-dormant potential. "Yield," Graham said quietly, reversing their positions as Vorak fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the blade's revealing light. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Vorak's face contorted with rage and disbelief. Then, with profound reluctance, he lowered his head. "I yield," he said, the words clearly painful to one unaccustomed to defeat. The challenge is decided. The dome of energy surrounding them dissipated, revealing the astonished faces of the observers, the Haven Council, Vorak's honor guard, and Lurin, whose expression transformed from tension to wonder to joy in rapid succession. Elder Tarish stepped forward, his ancient voice resonant with formal authority. "The challenge is complete. Victory is awarded to Graham Hayes of Earth, wielder of the Blade of Truth. By the laws of the Celestial Covenant, all claims upon Shield Maiden Lurin are hereby dissolved." Lurin moved to Graham's side, supporting him as the sword's energy receded, leaving him suddenly aware of his injuries and exhaustion. "You did it," she whispered, awe in her voice. "You defeated the undefeated." "Not through combat skill," Graham replied weakly. "The sword, it showed the truth of our intentions. That was what mattered in the end." Vorak rose slowly, his perfect features composed once more, though something had changed in his bearing, a subtle diminishment, as though the blade's revelation had permanently altered him. "The challenge is honored," he said formally. "I withdraw all claims in pursuit." His gaze lingered briefly on Lurin. "You choose a strange path, Shield Maiden, but it seems the ancient powers favor it." To Graham, he added, "Guard the blade well, human. Its awakening will not go unnoticed by others in the court." With that, Vorak and his honor guard departed, returning to their vessel without further comment. As their ship rose from Haven's surface, disappearing into the veiled nebula, Graham finally allowed himself to acknowledge the magnitude of what had transpired. "Is it truly over?" he asked Lurin as they watched the ship vanish from sight. "This confrontation?" "Yes," she replied. "But the blade's awakening changes everything. The court will be in turmoil as news spreads." She smiled, taking his hand in hers. "But for now, we have earned a moment of peace." In the days that followed, Graham's injuries healed with remarkable speed, accelerated by Haven's advanced medical technology and the lingering effects of his connection to the sword. The council convened multiple sessions to discuss the implications of Vorak's defeat and the blade's full awakening, debates that often continued long into Haven's gentle nights. Through it all, Graham and Lurin remained constant companions, their bond deepening as they navigated the aftermath of their victory. What had begun as an accidental partnership had evolved into something neither could have anticipated, a connection that transcended their different natures and origins. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their quarters, watching twin moons rise over Haven's forested valleys, Lurin finally addressed what had grown between them. "My people live for millennia," she said softly. "We measure relationships in centuries, not years. To bond with a human." She hesitated. "It is unprecedented." Graham turned to her, the sword at his side humming gently in response to his emotions. "Everything about us has been unprecedented from the moment I touched that sword." "True," Lurin acknowledged with a smile. "Yet this is different. more personal, more consequential. Are you concerned about the difference in our lifespans? Graham asked. The question that had haunted his own thoughts. Among other things, Lurin admitted. I will outlive you by millennia, Graham. Unless... Unless? She met his gaze directly, her otherworldly eyes reflecting starlight. The blade's energy has already changed you in subtle ways. Your recovery from injuries, your ability to channel powers no human should withstand. Given time and continued exposure, those changes could become more profound. Graham considered this, understanding the implications. You're saying I might not remain entirely human. I'm saying you might live far longer than you expected, Lurin clarified. Though yes, certain aspects of your physiology would likely evolve to accommodate the blade's energy, becoming something between human and celestial, Graham mused. The archaeologist in him found the concept fascinating rather than frightening. Evolution accelerated through direct exposure to advanced energies. It would be a journey with no map, Lurin cautioned. No guarantee of success. Graham took her hand, feeling the subtle energy that flowed beneath her skin, resonating with his own, newly awakened potential. The best journeys rarely come with guarantees. Lurin's expression softened, her free hand rising to touch his face with gentle wonder. You continue to surprise me, archaeologist. Most beings would hesitate at such a transformation. I've spent my career studying the past, Graham replied. Perhaps it's time to help shape the future instead. Their kiss, when it came, was like nothing Graham had experienced. A connection not just of bodies, but of energies. The sword at his side blazing with approving light as their auras intermingled. In that moment, the differences between human and celestial seemed less like barriers and more like complementary aspects of a greater whole. Later that night, as they lay together beneath Haven's alien stars, Lurin traced patterns on Graham's skin that mirrored the constellations above. What happens now? He asked, echoing the question he had posed when they first arrived on Haven. Lurin's smile held both wisdom and anticipation. Now we write our own story, not the one others prescribed. The Blade's awakening has opened possibilities long forgotten, paths between worlds, powers beyond the court's current understanding. Sounds like quite an adventure, Graham observed. One worthy of the archaeologist and the goddess, Lurin replied with a hint of teasing. Graham laughed. I thought you weren't a goddess. I'm not, she conceded. But I suspect that's how the story will be told, generations from now. Myths have a way of simplifying complex truths. As an archaeologist, I should object to historical inaccuracy, Graham said, pulling her closer. But in this case, I find I don't mind. Their laughter mingled in the night air, a sound of joy and possibility that echoed across Haven's peaceful valleys. Whatever challenges awaited, from the court, from the awakened power of the Blade, from the uncharted territory of their unique bond, they would face them together, archaeologist and shield maiden, united by choice rather than destiny. And in that choice lay the greatest power of all, the freedom to write their own future among the stars.